Hello everyone, my name is Ajayadola Timtayo. I'm your online lecturer. I want to believe you enjoyed the last class and I want to believe it's very impactful. Now here is another lecture video again that it's actually going to help you in your study of introductory biochemistry. So I want to enjoin you to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification button, and as well ensure you share the link to this video with your friends so that everybody and the whole world can learn together from this. Thank you. Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to class. Today we are going to be dealing with the topic known as cell, and the topic is divided into two parts, but today we're going to start with the part 1 of the topic. Now the first question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is cell all about? Now basically we know right from our O-level biology that cell is the basic structural and functional unit of all known living things. Of course, this means that without the cell there is no life. So talking about the cell is regarded as the smallest unit of organism that is classified as living, and it is often called the building block of life. Now basically, as you know, when you are building a house, of course you need bricks, or what we call blocks. You put one brick over another to get a building well built. Now the same thing comes up in building up of life, and the same thing comes up in building up of living organisms. We have two or more cells come together to form what we call the tissue. Two or more tissue come together to form what we call the organs. Two or more organs come together to form what we call the system. Now the system comes together to form the whole living organism. Now very importantly, I would love to let you know that the evidence and proof that an organism possesses life is because it possesses cell. That means without cell there will be no life. Now in our previous video we made mention of the fact that the cell is made up of atoms. Now these atoms come together to form molecules. Now these molecules come together to form macromolecules. Macromolecules come together to form the cell organelle. The cell organelle comes together to form the cell. Now talking about the cell, we either have a unicellular or multicellular kind of cell. Now when we talk about unicellular kind of cell, we are talking about a cell that is just single. So when we call an organism a unicellular organism, we are saying that organism possesses just a single cell. And when we call an organism a multicellular organism, we are saying such organism possess a lot of cells. Now example of multicellular organisms that we have in nature is human being. Now the question is, why is the study of cell so much important to biochemistry? Now the study of cell in biochemistry becomes very paramount because biochemistry studies life from the atomic and molecular level, and these atoms and molecules are found right inside the cell. And as a matter of fact, without these atom molecules and macromolecules found inside the cell, there is basically no biochemical reaction that can occur in the cell. So when we talk about the cell, basically it must register to your mind as a student that the cell is the building block of life, just as seen in the organization of life in the diagram below. Now, having talked about that, it's very important that you have this very reasonable information that examples of unicellular organism we have are bacteria. We have a whole lot of them, but a common example is bacteria. And multicellular organism, I've said before now, that human being. For example, human being possess 100 trillions of cells. Now these cells are massive. In fact, only the human brain possess lots of cells. Now, for example, the diagram below gives a good understanding of the anatomy of the cell. Taking a look at this, you can see that we have the various cell organelles here. We have the nucleus, we have the mitochondria, we have the vacuole, we have the cytoplasm. Now, this is a typical example of an animal cell, and this is how an animal cell is. Now, talking about this cell you are taking a look at, is made up of atoms. These atoms come together to form molecules. These molecules come together to form the macromolecules. Now, these macromolecules come together to form what we call the cell organelles. Of course, when we talk about the cell organelles, we are talking about the specialized subunits usually found within the cell that has specific functions. Now, for example, in the body system, there are various organs. We have organs like the lungs, we have organs like the liver, we have organs like the kidney. Now, all of these organs come together to form the human body. Now, the same thing are found in the cell. Now, there are a lot of cell organelles. For example, we have the nucleus, we have the mitochondria, we have the vacuole, we have the plasma membrane, and so on and so forth. Just like we have a lot of organs in human body, all of these cell organelles are also found in the cell, and they perform various specific functions to make the cell function perfect. Now, just like I've said before, remember, the cell are made up of atoms. These atoms come together to form molecules. These molecules come together to form what we call macromolecules. For example, macromolecule, we have lipids, we have carbohydrates, we have protein, and so on and so forth. And these macromolecules form what we call the cell organelle. To understand about atoms, molecule, macromolecules, and cell organelle extensively, I will advise you watch the first video. We made a lot of explanations about all of these terms in the first video, so you can just go through it, brush through before you move into cell. And I want to believe you are enjoying this lecture, so please remember to subscribe and hit the notification button so as to get more video. Now, let's take a look at the general principle of the cell. Remember, there is this saying that says that a town or a country without law does not have a sin. Now, the cell has principles that govern it. There are a lot of principles that govern the cell. Now, for example, a cell is self-containing and is self-maintaining. Now, which means that a cell has the ability to exert all the characteristics of living things. Of course, when we talk about living thing can be said to be any organism that possess the characteristics or the ability to move, to respire, to nutrite, to respond to stimuli, to grow, to excrete, to reproduce, to compete, to adapt, and to die. Because when we talk about the characteristics of living things right from our O-level biology, we talk about all of these things I've mentioned. And of course, what we are trying to say here is that a cell on its own, being a living organism, has the ability to exert all the characteristics of living thing. That is, a cell has the ability to move. Any organism that possesses cell has the ability to move, respire, nutrite, respond to stimuli, grow, excrete, reproduce, compete, adapt to the environment, and as well die. Now, apart from that, a cell also has the ability to reproduce. Now, basically, when we talk about reproduction in cells, it either occurs in form of binary fission, in form of mitosis or meiosis. Now, talking about the binary fission form of reproduction is basically formed or seen in bacteria. And when we talk about the mitosis and meiosis form of reproduction, is basically formed in advanced organism. Now, to start with, let's see what cell division is all about. When we talk about cell division, this is a process via which parent cell divides into two or more daughter cells. Of course, when we talk about cell division, it deals with a parent cell, it divides into two or more daughter cells. Now, this cell division is a very, it's a part of biology, or let me say, this part of biochemistry that is wide. So we are just going to streamline it for the purpose of this class. Now, talking about cell division, we are going to limit ourselves to binary fission, mitosis, and meiosis. Now, when we talk about binary fission, we talk about the fact that binary fission is an asexual form of reproduction where parent cell divides, resulting in two identical cells. And each of these identical cells has the ability to grow into the original size of the cell that they came from. Now, when talking about binary fission, one thing that must come to your subconscious as a student is that it's an asexual form of reproduction. And of course, when we talk about an asexual form of reproduction, we're talking about a form of reproduction that involves just a parent. Now, this parent then divides. In order for it to produce a younger one, this parent divide, to result into two identical cells. Of course, from this, you should have gotten to know that one of the characteristics of binary fission form of cell division is that it occurs in asexual reproduction. 1. 2. It involves only one parent cell. 3. It results in two identical cells. The cell formed from the parent cell are identical, and each of them has the ability to grow to the original size of the cell. Now, example of binary fission are majorly found in bacteria too. Now, going to mitosis. Now, in mitosis, a single cell divides into two identical daughter cells. Very similar to binary fission, mitosis is another form of cell division, and this also involves a single cell dividing into two identical daughter cells. Unlike meiosis, in meiosis, a single cell divides twice to produce four daughter cells. And what we are trying to say here is that in meiosis, the cell division that occur in meiosis occur twice. Now, the first cell division. Now, let's see a diagram to that effect. Now, you can see in meiosis. Now, you can see the parent cell divides into two daughter cells at first. Now, each of the two daughter cells divides into two daughter cells each, making four daughter cells altogether. Unlike mitosis, the parent cell form two daughter cells straight away. Now, you can see this binary fission mode of reproduction, which we told you is an asexual form of reproduction. As you can see the daughter cell, or let me say the parent cell at first, undergoing DNA replication, and from DNA replication you can see cytokinesis occurring, that is division of the replicated DNA into two of the daughter cells, and you can see the two identical daughter cells formed. So this is what we talk about when we talk about reproduction by cell division. So when we say a cell is self-containing and self-maintaining, number one thing is that that cell can reproduce by itself via the process of cell division. Another thing is that a cell can use enzymes and other proteins coded for DNA genes and made via messenger RNA and ribosome. Of course, when we talk about this, one thing that should come to your subconscious is that enzymes. What are enzymes? Enzymes are biocatalysts that speed up the rate of reactions within the cells. automatically, if there are no enzymes in the cell, of course, a lot of biochemical reactions that occur in the cells will have occurred slowly, and that will have caused a lot of havoc to organisms. Now, but due to the availability of cells, of enzymes now in the cells, you can see there are a lot of biochemical reactions that are being on a speed up within the cells, and this actually make the functioning activity of an organism to be on a standard rate. Now, not only that, for us to say a cell is self-containing and self-maintaining, then such cell must be able to use enzymes, and such cell must be able to use proteins that are coded for by various DNA genes via the messenger RNA. Now, to talk about this, I would love to let you know that within the cell, or for example, let me use human being here. In human being, we have a whole lot of enzymes. Example, we have the taurine in the saliva, we have the alpha amylase produced by the pancreas, we have alpha glucosidase produced by the stomach lining, we as well have pepsin, we have lipase. Each of these enzymes has one or two things they do in the body. For example, the taurine and the alpha amylase alongside the alpha glucosidase helps in the breakdown of carbohydrates, while pepsin in the body helps in the breakdown of proteins. Lipase aids the breakdown of lipids. So for a cell to be self-containing and self-maintaining, it must be able to use enzymes. Not only that, a cell must also be able to use other proteins that are coded for by DNA genes and made via messenger RNA and ribosome. Now, I would like to start from what ribosome is all about. Now, when we talk about ribosome, we are talking about this cell organelle. You know, ribosome is a cell organelle that aid protein synthesis. Now, when we talk about ribosome, we refer ribosome to the sites of protein synthesis within the cell. Now, let me quickly rush to the DNA gene aspect of this point and the messenger RNA for appropriate understanding. Now, one thing you must understand is that all proteins in the body or in the cell has a particular gene that are responsible for them. Now, of course, when we talk about the DNA, like we discussed in our previous video, the DNA is known as the deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is on this DNA, the DNA is present inside the cell. It is present inside the nucleus of the cell. Now, it is on this DNA that we have all the genes that are expressed in the body. Of course, what are we trying to talk about here? You remember when we talked about macromolecule in our previous video, we talked about nucleic acid, and we talked about the fact that when we talk about nucleic acid, we refer to DNA and RNA. And this DNA and RNA, they are the genetic material of the cell. Now, talking about this DNA and RNA now, you must understand the fact that without the DNA and RNA, there is no way genetic material or gene can be transferred from parents to offspring. Of course, I know you'll have seen situations where a father gave birth to an offspring who resemble him so much, and I'm so sure you'll have also seen situations where a grandfather has a grandson who resemble him so much. Now, all of these things are made possible, you know, all of these behaviors and all of these traits are made transferable via the availability of the DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid, and the RNA ribonucleic acid present in the cell. So when the proteins in the body are to be expressed, what happens is that the DNA synthesize or produce what we call a messenger RNA. Now, this messenger RNA now then synthesize what we call the proteins via the help of the ribosome in the cell. So that's why we say for a cell to be referred to as a self-containing and self-maintaining living thing, then it must be able to use enzyme and other proteins coded for by DNA genes and made available via messenger RNA. Not only that, before then, let's look at something. Another thing is that for a cell to be referred to as self-containing and self-maintaining, it must be able to carry out metabolism. Now, we've talked extensively about metabolism in our previous video. Now, when we talk about metabolism, it's divided into two. We have anabolism and catabolism. So, we have anabolism and catabolism. So, when we talk about anabolism in the body system, we're talking about building up of various materials. Now, when we talk about catabolism, we're talking about the breakdown of various materials. Let me quickly give you an example to that effect. Now, when you take in a carbohydrate-rich diet, now it breaks down in your body to form what we call glucose. Now, these glucose are used up by the body system, but most times this carbohydrate-rich diet produces glucose that are in excess to the body system. So what the body system does is that the body system take up all this glucose and save them in the liver and in the muscle as what we call glycogen. Now, the process by which this glucose are being taken up into the body to be kept in the liver and in the muscle are known as anabolism, because that's a form of building up. Now, when you are fasting, or maybe you've not taken breakfast and you need to do one activity or the other, now what the body does is that it goes to the glycogen in the liver and in the muscle and breaks it down, and immediately it breaks it down, glucose is released in the body. Now this process is known as catabolism. Now let me give you a real life example. Now when you are building a house, you put brick upon brick, brick upon brick, brick upon brick to ensure that the house is well built. That is a form of building up process, and that is anabolism. Now when you bring a bulldozer to destroy the building, that's a form of catabolism. So the same process also occurs in the cell. So when we talk about metabolism in the cell, we refer to the whole range of biochemical process that occur within a living organism, and it could either be in form of anabolism, that is building up of various substances in the body, or catabolism, that is breaking down of various substances in the body. Now let me give you another example. For example, the monomer or the small molecule that form protein are known as amino acid. Now these amino acid come together in their large numbers to form what we call the proteins. Now this protein at the long run becomes what we call a macromolecule. You know, a lot of amino acid comes together building up to form what we call a protein. That is what an anabolic process, that's anabolism, building up of substance. Now on the other hand, when this protein begin to disintegrate, that is begin to break down to form these amino acids, then that's the process of catabolism, that is breaking down of substance, and all of this occur within the cell. Now another thing is that for a cell to be referred to as self-maintaining and self-containing, such cell must be able to respond to external and internal stimuli, such as change in temperature, pH, or level of nutrients. Now at this point, I'm sure that you are enjoying this class, so why not just click on the subscribe button so that you can continue to learn. For a cell to be said to be self-containing and self-maintaining. Such cell must be able to respond to external and internal stimuli such as temperature, pH, or level of nutrients. Of course, you remember that one of the characteristics of living thing we made mention of at the beginning of this class is the ability of a living thing to respond to stimuli, which is also otherwise known as irritability. Now, all cells must respond to external stimuli. Let me give you an example. For example, if I slap your face, you will feel a pain and you will react by shouting. That is an example of you responding to stimuli. If I knock your head, you are going to shout in agony or in pain. That is an example of you responding to an external stimuli. For example, when you begin to feel a stomach pain from the inside of you, you begin to give out various complaints. That's an example of an internal stimuli being responded to. So for a cell to be regarded to as self-containing and self-maintaining, it must be able to respond to external and internal stimuli such as temperature, pH. When we talk about pH, we are talking about the rate of acidity or alkalinity within the cell, and a cell must also be able to respond to various level of nutrients. Not only that, all cells are made up of cell membrane, which are made up of lipid bilayer with a protein embedded in it. Of course, you can see the diagram here before you. Now, taking a look at this diagram, the brown coloration on this diagram signify the lipid bilayer, while the blue coloration embedded within the brown coloration indicate the various protein. And in eukaryotic cells, the plasma membrane performs the function of mitochondria, chloroplast, and the Golgi apparatus. Now, that's to let you know that the mitochondria, chloroplast, and Golgi apparatus are not found in the prokaryotic cell. So, the functions that mitochondria, chloroplast, and Golgi apparatus perform in eukaryotic cell are being performed by the plasma membrane of the prokaryotic cells. Now, let's take a look at the function of mitochondria, the function of chloroplast, the functions of Golgi apparatus. Now, we'll talk about the mitochondria. Mitochondria play a critical role in generating energy in the cell, and that is why we call mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell, because this is where energy is generated from for the various metabolic process and biochemical reactions that occur within the cell. The chloroplasts basically are found in some bacteria and basically in plant cell. Now, they are important in photosynthesis. Now, when we talk about these chloroplasts, now they possess what we call chlorophyll. Now, this chlorophyll are so important such that they aid the trapping of sunlight from the sky. Now, this chlorophyll contained in the chloroplast aid the trapping of sunlight and make use of carbon dioxide and water to produce plant product, that is the fruits and the various food substances that are produced by plants. Not only that, Golgi apparatus on its own aid the processing and packaging of the various macromolecules in the cell. Remember, we talked about macromolecules in our previous videos. I made mention of the fact that macromolecules that we have in the cell basically are carbohydrate, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Not only that, this prokaryotic cell we are talking about are divided into three architectural regions. The number one is the appendages, the number two is the cell envelope, the number three is the cytoplasmic region. Now when we talk about the appendage region of the prokaryotic cell, this appendage region of the prokaryotic cell are made up of flagella, which are used for movement, and pili, which are the proteins attached to this prokaryotic cell surface. Now the function of this pili is that this pili help the prokaryotic cell or the prokaryotes to attach themselves to their hosts. So flagella in prokaryotes are used for movement, and the pili are used, they are the proteins attached to the cell surface. Now these two, that is the flagella and the pili, made up the appendages region of the prokaryotic cell. Not only that, another region of the prokaryotic cell we have is the cell envelope. Now this cell envelope is made up of the capsule, the cell wall, and the plasma membrane. Now in previous slide we've made mention of the plasma membrane and we've explained it extensively. Now let's talk about the cell wall. Now we'll talk about the cell wall. The cell wall is the outermost layer of the cell, and it is basically found in plants, in bacteria, in fungi, in algae. And this cell wall, what it does is that it gives shape to the cell and protect the cell from infection. Now all these cells that possess the cell wall also possess the cell membrane, which made all the cell as a double protection activity within them, because the cell membrane protects the cell from what goes out and coming of the cell. Now the cell wall on its own, made up of what we call the Peptidoglycan Layer, also protects the cell and give the cell a good shape. So when we talk about the cell envelope region of the prokaryotic cell, these are made up of the capsule, the cell wall, and the plasma membrane. Now when we talk about the capsule now, the capsule protects the cell from engulfment. Now it protects the cell from being engulfed by other cells. And not only that, the capsule is considered as the virulence factor. That is, it enhances the ability of a bacteria to cause disease. Now, so the capsule found in bacteria, or the capsule found in some disease causing bacteria, are the virulence factor of such bacteria. That is, they are the one that made it possible for those bacteria to be able to cause various disease they cause. So when we talk about the cell envelope architectural region of the prokaryotic cell, is made up of the capsule and the cell wall. The cytoplasmic region of this prokaryotic cell are made up of DNA. Of course, when we talk about the DNA, we are talking about the deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the major genetic material that are found in the cells. So the cytoplasmic region of the architectural part of prokaryotic cell are made up of DNA and ribosome. And remember, I've told the function of ribosome before now, that they are organelles that are responsible for protein synthesis. So basically, when we talk about the prokaryotic cell, let it register in your memory that the prokaryotic cell are made up of three architectural regions, namely the appendages, which are divided into the flagella and the pili; 2, the cell envelope, which are made up of a capsule, a cell wall, and a plasma membrane; 3, the cytoplasmic region, which are made up of the DNA and the ribosome. Not only that, prokaryotic cell also possess plasma membrane that are made up of phospholipid bilayer. We've explained what phospholipid bilayer is all about, alongside what plasma membrane is all about in our previous slide. Now let's take a look at this. Another thing that we must take note of is that The prokaryotic cell have a cell wall. We've made mention of this, and this cell wall is made up of what we call the peptidoglycan layer, which act as an additional barrier against external force towards the cell. We've explained this before now, but let's look at what peptidoglycan means. When we talk about peptidoglycan, we are talking about the basic units of a cell wall that confer or gives the cell wall a mechanical rigidity. So the peptidoglycan present in the cell wall gives the cell a mechanical rigidity, that is, it makes the cell rigid, and it protects the cytoplasmic membrane of the cell from every form of external force. All of this must be registered in our memory. And of course, the peptidoglycan is made up of both protein and carbohydrate, from the word peptido, peptide, protein, and glycan, glycogen, carbohydrate. So the peptidoglycan is made up of both protein and carbohydrate, and it protects the cell from the various external force that want to disrupt the activity of the cell. Not only that, the prokaryotic cell also possess what we call the ability to undergo cytolysis. The prokaryotic cell wall now, it protects the cell from what we call cytolysis that are caused by osmotic pressure against hypotonic environment. Now, what is cytolysis? From the word cyto and lysis. Cyto means cell. When you hear the word cyto, what should come to your memory is cell. When you hear the word lysis, what should come to your memory is breakdown. So when we talk about cytolysis, this occurs when the cell bursts due to an osmotic imbalance. When there is excess water diffusing or entering into the cell, it causes an osmotic imbalance within the cell and make the cell burst. This process is what we call cytolysis. So the cell wall stands as a medium to protect the cell from cytolysis. Now, when we talk about osmotic pressure, this is the pressure that causes the diffusion of water through the semi-permeable membrane, that is through the plasma membrane of the cell. So osmotic pressure is not a palatable situation to the cell because it causes what we call an hypotonic environment around the cell. Now, when we talk about an hypotonic environment, this is a kind of environment characterized by water moving into the cell and causing the cell to swell. Now, when the cell swells, now it explodes. Now, majorly, cells that don't have cell wall explode when they are exposed to an hypotonic environment. For example, the plant cell has a cell wall, so it will hardly be affected by an hypotonic environment, unlike an animal cell. Now, an animal cell does not possess a cell wall, so when an animal cell is exposed to water, such cell will swell up. And that is why when you throw human being into water, such human being, after getting drunk, will swell and begin to float on top of the water. At that point, death has come. At that point, you say such human being has been exposed to an hypotonic environment, because human cells are animal cells and they are eukaryotic cells. Not only that, we have some set of prokaryotes that does not possess cell wall. Example are the mycoplasma and the thermoplasma. Another thing you have to understand about the prokaryotic cells is that the DNA of the prokaryotic cell are circular in shape. They're circular in shape. Now, let's take a look at the prokaryotic cell. When we talk about the prokaryotic cell, one thing that you must note about the prokaryotic cells, or the prokaryote generally, is that they possess nucleus. One thing you must understand about the eukaryotic cell is that they possess nucleus. Unlike the prokaryote does not possess nucleus, but the eukaryote, they possess nucleus. Now, a typical example of the eukaryotic cell are the plant and animal cell. Of course, the diagram before you is a typical diagram of an eukaryotic cell. From the word eukaryote, it means true cell. So eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes are organisms that possess cell, that possess nucleus. Eukaryotes are organisms that possess nucleus. So, one thing about the eukaryotic cell is that the eukaryotic cells are 10 times larger than the prokaryotic cells, and they are 1000 times greater in volume. Another thing is that the eukaryotic cell contain membrane bound compartments in which specific metabolic activities take place. What we are trying to say is that each of the organelles in prokaryotic cells has a membrane bound compartment, and it is inside this membrane bound compartment that the various metabolic activity of the eukaryotic cell take place. Just like we've said before now, unlike the prokaryotes, the eukaryote possess a cell nucleus, and hence they possess a cellular or a nuclear envelope. So only an organism that possess a cell nucleus will possess a nuclear envelope. Now, the function of the nuclear envelope is that the nuclear envelope protect the nucleus of the cell from other organelles of the cell. Another thing is that in eukaryotic cell wall may be present and may not be present. For example, in plant cell, which is an example of an eukaryotic cell, we have a cell wall, but in animal cell we don't have a cell wall, and that's the reason why plant cell we hardly subject to hypotonic environment because of its availability of cell wall. Unlike animal cell can easily subject to an hypotonic environment because it does not possess a cell wall, and that's what we've explained in our previous slide. The DNA of an eukaryotic cell are arranged in a linear molecular form. That is, the DNA found in eukaryotic are linear in shape, unlike the DNA found in prokaryote, they are circular in shape. Another thing is that a lot of eukaryotes, they engage in locomotion or movement through the use of what we call cilia or flagella. Now, the cilia are majorly used by paramecium for movement, while the flagella are used by euglena. Let's take a look at the structures. We need to take a look at the similarities and the differences between the structures of the animal cell and the plant cell. Now, when we take a look at it, just like we've been saying ever before now, here are the various cell organelles of both animal cell and plant cell. We said something that cells generally are made up of similar chemistry and physiology. Example of that now is seen in the structure of both plant and animal cells. They have a whole lot of cell organelles in common, which is a confirmation that they have similar physiology and chemistry. Now, the major difference between the plant cell and the animal cell is that plant cell possess cell wall, while animal cell does not possess cell wall. Animal cell possess centrole, while plant cell does not. Plant cell possess chloroplast, while animal cell does not. But apart from that, every other organelles present in animal cell are in plant cells. So this diagram gives a very good similarity. It gives a good comparison in terms of similarity and difference between the plant cell and the animal cell, giving a broad diagram with labelings of the similarities in the cell organelles and their difference. Now, here is a table to show the various similarity and differences in the plant and animal cell, just like it has been depicted by the diagram in slide before. Now more explanation on the various features and cell organelles present in both plant and animal cell are going to be taken at an in-depth way. In animal cell, for example, we have cell organelles like nucleus, like nucleolus, like the rough endoplasmic reticulum, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and all of these organelles are also present in plant cell. Now, each of these organelles are going to be discussed alongside their function to an in-depth way in our next lecture video. So ensure that you keep calm and continue to learn. At this point, I want to believe that you are enjoying the class, so kindly ensure that you click the subscribe button so that together we can continue to learn. And also remember that there are questions at the end of each lecture video, so take time, assess these questions, answer them as a medium to test your knowledge, and also submit your answers via the email that are going to be given to you at the end of the lecture video. So remember to subscribe, remember to like this YouTube channel, share this video with your friends, share the link with them, and keep learning. Now let's take a look at the comparison feature of both prokaryotic and the eukaryotic. Of course, we know we've actually talked about most of these features ever before now, so this is just a table to give you a summary of the differences and the similarities between the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic. Now remember that the prokaryotics do not have cell, while the prokaryotic do not have nucleus, but the eukaryotic, they have nucleus. Remember that the prokaryotic has a circular shaped DNA, while the eukaryotic DNA are linear in shape. Remember that most of the eukaryotic occur as a unicellular organism, that is, they occur as organisms with just one cell. Unlike eukaryotic, they occur as either unicellular organism or multicellular organism. Remember, the mode of cell division in prokaryotes is binary fission, while in eukaryotes is mitosis or meiosis. All of these points are points that can be asked in your exam, they can be asked in your test. These are points that lecturers or your teachers can use to test you, so ensure you take note of all of these points. Now here are the questions that I told you we are going to give to you at the end of this lecture video. For example, when you ask answer questions like giving a concise definition of the cell, giving an highlight of two differences between the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic cell. Now basically all of these questions have their answers in this lecture video. So if you find out that you cannot answer any of these questions, please go back to the lecture video and watch it over and over again. But I can assure you that all these questions have their answers in the lecture video, and you will enjoy and stream all of these questions. As a reminder, remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel and as well click the notification button to get notified when we drop new video. And you can as well send in your questions, the answers to your questions and other suggestions to the below email or this phone number. Meanwhile, bear it in mind that our next lecture is going to be on detailed discussion on each of the cell organelles we've actually talked about in this lecture video, and I can assure you that it's going to be a wonderful one. Thank you.